And you heard JP mention the federal government's efforts to get Canadians out of the Middle East. According to Global Affairs Canada, there are more than 97,000 Canadians registered in the region. So let's dig a little deeper into that angle of the story with Jennifer Yoon in Toronto. And Jennifer, what's the government saying that it's going to do to help Canadians who want to get out?
Well, right now, they're telling Canadians to try and get out on their own if they can, if it's safe to do so, that they shouldn't depend on the Canadian government to get them out. As you can imagine, this is happening in a context where governments around the world are scrambling to get their citizens home, and Canada's response doesn't go as far as other countries. Some, like the UK or Slovakia, have sent military or charter planes to the region to evacuate its citizens. The US, too, says it's planning on sending military and charter planes to get Americans out. Now, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney says the situation is too dangerous for large-scale evacuations at the moment, but he also said that the government is working with airlines. And Foreign Minister Anita Anand says that she's also working with Gulf countries, for example, Oman.
They still have, or had at the time of my conversation with the foreign minister, have airspace that is still viable. And so I requested use of that airspace if necessary for Canadian citizens to get out.
So there are some spaces, some countries where the airspace is operating. And also, we do know that a limited number of commercial flights did manage to leave Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So those flights are underway. Canada also says it has secured a limited number of seats on commercial flights from Beirut to Istanbul.
And Sarah Galashan is watching that angle of the story, and she's going to update us if, in fact, there are updates about what's happening at various airports and airlines in the region. Jennifer, what do we know about how the Canadians who are stranded in the Middle East, how they're coping?
Well, for many, there's really not a lot to do but wait. And some are thinking about possible alternative pathways home, thinking about little flight paths that could hopefully take them home. We spoke with a Queen's University professor who is stuck in Doha, Qatar. He was with a group of students. They're on their way home from a school trip in Sri Lanka. They're stuck in Doha now, and thankfully he says that he feels pretty safe in Doha at the moment. But the big question really is, how are they going to get back to Canada?
It's not feeling insecure where we are. It's how do we get a plane out of here? And, they're obviously going to have to come up with a different flight path, I suspect, flying through Oman, down, sort of skirting the southern border of Saudi Arabia, because flying directly over the Middle East right now is not tenable.
So some Canadians coping by thinking about ways to get out. Others also thinking about land borders, crossing over to, for example, Saudi Arabia, where the airspace is open. You can get there from Qatar and flying out from there then to Canada. But many that we heard from hoping for a little more help, a little more support from Ottawa, from the Canadian government.
Yeah, all right. CBC's Jennifer Yoon in Toronto. Thank you. Amid the widening tensions in the Middle East, what is available for Canadians in the region? Let's connect now with Dennis Horak. He's a former Canadian head of mission to Iran from 2009 to 2012 when Canada closed its embassy in Tehran. He's also the former Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, and Yemen from 2015 to 2018. Dennis, thank you very much for joining us. When you hear there are 97,000 Canadians registered in this region, permanent residents as well, and a number of them, who knows how many, want to come back and can't find a way. From a practical perspective, what can Canada do to help?
Well, first thing, there's very likely way more than that. A lot of Canadians who live in the region don't register with the embassy, so the numbers are much greater. The government knows that. It's tough in a war zone, evacuation or working out plans to get people out. It's tough, especially with commercial flights being delayed or canceled, airports being closed, traveling across a land in a war zone as unpredictable as this one is very difficult. The government will have contingency plans for all of these countries and various scenarios, but it's going to be challenging, that's for sure.
I've talked to Canadians who have been in conflict areas or places that have been ravaged by hurricanes, and more than a few times I've heard them complain that they felt they weren't getting support from the Canadian government. And that doesn't necessarily mean flights back. It means maybe somebody answering a phone or just a sense that there is timely information that they're getting. Do you think those kinds of complaints are fair?
I understand them completely. In situations like this, people are frustrated, families are scared. It's very difficult. And the government does stand up special task forces in these sorts of situations to try and beef up the communications capabilities that are in place in Ottawa and at embassies. They do the best they can. The priority is been given to consular matters. That's 100% for sure. The issue partly also is the information. To predict what's happening with a hurricane is one thing. For a war that's like this kind of a war, which is very erratic, which spasms in various countries at various times, it's difficult to have a good handle on the information that's out there, particularly in a war that we're not involved with. So we don't have all the details. We don't have all the operational information at our fingertips. We're having to rely on allies and partners in the region, also to rely on those that are involved in the conflict, Israel and the United States in this case. So getting the information is tough. Getting it out there is tough as well. But I can assure you, it's a priority for the government. It's a priority for the people who work for the government. It's challenging and it's easy for me to counsel patients, and I understand the frustration.
The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, today, his tone really stood out to me. Like, he sounded quite, trying to convey urgency, even asking the mainstream media, of all things, a group that he's not necessarily, very supportive of, to get the message out to Americans, to register, to pay attention to the U.S. government websites, and that the U.S. government is working hard to try to get Americans out. I assume they have many, many more people in this region than Canada does. Is that potentially going to be a route out for Canadians if the U.S. starts, chartering planes out?
Well, I'm sure we'll be coordinating and working with the Americans, particularly because they're one of the main belligerents in this. Also, what normally happens in these situations, Canada will coordinate with the U.S. and other Western allies as well to work out if there are joint actions we can take, if we can have Canadians piggyback on planes that they have, or vice versa. So it becomes a very collegial operation with our key allies, and everybody tries to pitch in. A lot of them also have many, many citizens in the country. So, the volume that we're all dealing with is challenging, and challenging to get the messaging out and making sure that people do register, making sure that people do pay attention, not only to what's on Canadian government websites, but also the local news, the wall-to-wall coverage that's going on there on the various news outlets, Al Jazeera, CNN, CBC, all of them.
One last thing, and you may not know the answer to this, but let me ask you. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Anand, requested the use of Oman's airspace to help evacuate Canadians in the region. What will that look like?
Oh, it makes sense because Oman, part of Oman, the sort of southern part of Oman, would be a little bit out of what seems at this point to be the war zone. Although, again, it's so erratic, we don't really know. And I think it's largely contingency planning. If we're able to get an aircraft, for example, into a certain part of Saudi Arabia, perhaps, towards the south of it, again, further away from the battlefield, and then fly out across Oman. I can see the logic in that. I think we're a ways off from that. Asking the Omanis, whom I'm not surprised would give permission for that, makes sense. Obviously, if there's any sort of airlift, it will have to be coordinated and be conflicted with the U.S. and others that are active in the region. So it's part of contingency planning, but I think it's probably still a ways off, depending on what happens in the air.
You know this region well, and you know diplomacy really well, so I appreciate being able to have you on the program. Dennis Horak, a former Canadian head of mission to Iran from 2009 to 2012, and the former Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, and Yemen from 2015 to 2018. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.